Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us at our lounge program called Creating Gender Inclusive Spaces for Camps and Other Summer Programs. I'm excited today because we're going to have a discussion with two camp directors to talk about kind of gender inclusion in camps. One is Sandra Collins. She's the founder and director of the Bay Area Rainbow Day Camp. And the other is Shana Barchas, who is the education director at Children's Fairyland, and they run a day camp.
Very close, Shana.
Shana, I'm sorry.
No
So a couple of things. One, we'll be taking questions at the end of the program. If you want to ask a question at the end, you just click the cluster of squares at the top right part of your screen, and then you'll be able to move back and forth, and you'll see a Q&A function and a showcase function. The Q&A function is where you can ask a question. The showcase function will have some helpful links, maybe things we mentioned in the broadcast, a link to Fairyland, a link to Bay Area Rainbow Day Camp, that kind of thing. So first, I just want to let you know really quickly about Gender Spectrum. Gender Spectrum is a nonprofit. Our mission is to create gender inclusive and sensitive spaces for all children and teens. And we have an online community called the Gender Spectrum Lounge, and this program is kind of part of that community, which includes all parents, parent groups, teen groups, and professionals groups, and then there's also education in the lounge. So we hope you'll join us on the lounge to continue this discussion afterwards. I'm going to start out really quickly. I just want to talk about kind of what is gender. So if we say some terms during this program, you'll understand what we're saying. When we talk about gender having three different dimensions. The first dimension is your biology. So that's your body parts, your hormones, your chromosomes, all the different things that go in your body that are, part of your physical body and biology. The second part is gender expression, and that is how you wear your gender, like how you wear your hair, your clothes, the activities you do, all of the things that our society kind of labels as either masculine or feminine. We call that gender expression. And then the third piece is gender identity, which is how you feel about yourself on the inside. Do you feel like a boy or a girl or both or neither or a variety of other gender identities? There's so many different gender identities. And so the way that all three of those factors work together kind of create a person's gender. So I just wanted to kind of outline that before we start talking. So first, I'm going to have Shana and Sandra introduce themselves and tell us a little bit briefly kind of about their particular camp. And I chose them because there are two different kinds of camps. Sandra's camp is specifically for gender expansive kids and their allies and siblings, and Shana's camp is more of a general day camp, but they've done some work to create gender inclusion at their camp. So Shana, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm a longtime supporter of Gender Spectrum. Mm-hmm. So Fairyland opened in 1950. We're the oldest storybook theme park in the world, and there's been a camp for quite a long time. And our camp is a day camp for children aged 5 through 10 with a dual focus on social and emotional development and imagination and imaginative play. So we do all kinds of activities at the park. We do park exploration where kids can go on the rides as much as they want to access and roll down Jack and Jill Hill and climb the pirate ship into the rigging. And then we also do workshops that have to do with the theme of the week, be it pirates or time travel. And then the third thing we do is we create plays. And so we make up plays with an inspiration from the theme of the week. And we do that through a play creation vision that I developed when I started 3 years ago. And so the kids work together using imagination and teamwork to create plays as a group that are totally child created and perform them at the end of the week.
Great. And Sandra?
So I'm the executive director and founder of Bay Area Rainbow Day Camp. And Camp Kicking It for teens, and we just went through a process of renaming our nonprofit to Engender because we've expanded our programs. But the mission of the overall organization is to empower gender-expansive youth to practice self-determination in order to live authentically and joyfully within their communities. So the camps are programs specifically organized to help youth reinforce positive gender identities within a safe space. So it really is about creating identity safety for both youth wherever they are along the gender spectrum, but also for their allies and siblings, because a lot of youth won't go to camp unless they can bring their best friend or their sibling or their twins for them. And so the idea is that these are safe spaces, and then there's a lot of components around that we'll get to later. But so we're really excited because that is one aspect for many kids. Some of them have positive gender identity or expression, and some of them are really shy. So it's a space in which they can come as they are and they're celebrated. And so a lot of them don't necessarily have this positive reinforcement for them. So this is for us, it was a unique and revolutionary concept in terms of a day camp.
Yeah, and why? I'll stick with you, Sandra. Why do you think it's important to have gender inclusion at camps? Why is it important to think about it?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think that, they talk about sort of gender expression, gender identity as reaching a tipping point in the United States, but I think we're still quite not there. It's not necessarily celebrated, maybe amongst the adult community, but in terms of young children, it's called being a gender pioneer. But for most kids, it's still a very tender area of their identity, and we have a lot of different aspects of who we are that we really want to encourage them to just be who they are, and it's an area of just being a kid that it's okay. So creating a gender inclusive space, we really follow what we call gender identity classrooms, the work that's done by Dorothy Steele and Becky Convargos, who's on our advisory board, in which diversity is a key aspect to the camp, but there's sort of pro-social relationships are also really important, so that so that there's these windows and mirrors, so that kids can come to camp as they are, wherever they are on the gender spectrum, because it's a key component of their identity, right? So that they can express themselves, they can feel safe. They have camp counselors who also reflect their identity, that they have the ability. There's so much growth that can happen through play, so that we have activities that are camp-based, that are fun. This is summer camp, this is not school, but that we have counselors who are also on the gender spectrum in terms of expression and identity. We have mental health counselors through In Mind who have been trained also through to reflect and who are experts in gender identity and expression. But we also have a lot of the activities that are art-based, yoga, spoken word poetry, collab, so that they can work through a lot of issues and through play about, sort of allowing them to sort of think about diversity and all the magic that is not just gender expressions, but all the different components of what it means to be human in their work. But it is about a camp that is very much youth-centered, but teaching them about socially emotional and gender inclusivity is important because it allows them to feel safe in a society in which that's really been ignored or marginalized.
So, Shana, what about you? In a more general day camp, why do you think it's important to pay attention to gender inclusion?
Well, I think that for a parent of a gender-expansive child, they put a huge amount of energy into prepping the school every year and when they come to the school, so that they know their child is going to feel safe, included, seen, and supported. And so, when you get to a school, you want to know that they are actively committed to working with your child and making a safe environment. And then you're going to meet with their teacher every year at the beginning. But a camp is different. A camp is 1 week. And so if a parent, a parent is not going to put the same time into prepping a camp that they are going to put into prepping a school. They're not going to put the same amount of time into vetting a camp. They're not going to put the same amount of time into meeting with the camp counselors or teachers. It's just not feasible for a week. And so the question is, are there camps that are actually reaching out and saying, we value and welcome your children. We're not only going to tolerate your children, we celebrate your children, and we invite them to come to our camp. And if parents are not experiencing that, where they're saying, wow, this is a place where my kid's going to really be happy, and I'm not going to feel like I have to bend over backward advocating for them all day, every day, they're going to say, this is worth it. And honestly, I think it's likely that if the amount of time that would have to go into creating that yourself and research might make camp seem like not a reasonable option otherwise. Yeah. And so that's why I think it's important for camp to do this work and prepare so that we can meet parents and say, we're ready, we're excited to have your children.
And that's true. And I mean, in my experience in working with parents, I think I've definitely heard parents say, I'm just not going to send my kid to camp. I'd much rather just keep them home.
And you want your child to be safe.
Yeah, exactly. So Shana, tell us a couple of things, like what are a few things that your camp does specifically or logistically to create a more gender inclusive environment for the campers?
So I would say there are four primary things. The first one is our forms. So I worked with Joel Baum at Gender Spectrum to redesign our forms a couple of years ago. And the options for gender on the forms, and I do ask for gender because I want to make sure that we have a gender balance in each group. So I do need to know it. However, what I'm asking for is gender identity and not biological sex. And so what I said to Joel was, I don't know what I should say. Should I say gender and leave it blank? Should I say gender, female, male, other? And he said, no. He said, Shana, nobody wants to say their child is other. And he said, what you should say is female, male, and the third option should be something else. And then if they click something else, then they get something that says, please share more. And this summer, I have 4 families who have shared that for their child. And so right from the start, they know, oh, this is something that the camp not only accepts, but is, reaching out to work with the children. The second thing is talking to the parents. As soon as I get a child who is gender expansive or transgendered signed up, I call the parents, and I answer all their questions. I tell them how excited I am to work with their child. I find out the pronouns the child prefers. I reassure them about bathrooms because that's always the parents' biggest concern. And I also ask them, if gender comes up and somebody says to your child, are you a girl or a boy? How would your child want our teachers to intervene? I want it to be based on the child's desire and comfort level, but I want us to be prepared to intervene. There are some children who like to talk about gender, and then the teacher can just watch and monitor. There are some children who really want the teacher to step in and say, he's a boy, and that's basically it, and then talk to the other child if they keep pursuing it. So we want to make sure that we're meeting the child where they're at and supporting them. The third thing is staff training. And so we explore gender and gender expansiveness and transgenderedness in staff training so the teachers feel prepared. And the fourth one is preparing the staff when they do have a transgender or gender expansive child in their group so that they know they know before that week exactly how the child wants to be addressed, etc., so that they're going in preparing the child to succeed instead of just saying, well, we'll see what happens.
Sure. Great. Thanks. And what about you, Sandra? Are there other things, since your whole camp is kind of geared towards gender expansiveness, what are some other things, besides the stuff that Shauna's talked about, that you guys think about?
Yeah, we still have to invest a lot in staff training so that we have common language, that even though our counselors are on the gender spectrum themselves, we still have to have them be very self-reflexive about not only their gender identity and expression, but also the campers, right? So that they can do their internal work, so that they can be there and present for the campers themselves. Because the campers will trigger one another. That I can't tell you how many conversations where I've had a camper say, "You're not a real girl," you know. I mean, and it's not because they're being mean, but they're working out the very things that they've heard at school or in the neighborhood. And we provide such a self-container for each other, for the campers, that we get to provide the modeling for how, when you interrogate bias, how do you become resilient? How do you become a kind person, and what's the kind of language, you know, that you want to have your camper provide to the other camper. So we do a lot of, you know, we've had Gender Spectrum come in for 2 days to our staff. We've had a lot of ruler training from Yale University Center for Emotional Intelligence to do all the social and emotional work, so that we have common language and a common approach. And then we also have, you know, in mind and counselors on staff each week, so that we have a lot of scaffolding for our campers and our counselors themselves. And every day, you know, when the campers come, they get to fill out their name tags, you know, so who they are, what pronouns. And some, you know, campers don't provide a pronoun because they're still exploring. You know, we have campers as young as 4 to 12 and 13 to 18, and so it's meant to be self-determining wherever you are, and we really meet each camper where they are, and that's meant to be the whole process, that it is about you get to decide who you are. And, you know, we don't have any imposition or any agenda other than this is a place, it's a safe place, and we're going to provide the tools and resources for you to develop your resiliency. We have parent circles or guardian circles to help provide information, both in terms of just helping the families understand both what it means to have a gender expansive youth, you know, and hopefully next summer we'll have like the Office of Civil Rights come in and provide information in terms of Title IX. So lots of information in terms of what it means to be, you know, how to help best provide a parenting or guardian to a gender expansive youth. Lots of, you know, in terms of agreements of how do you, when you come to camp, how do you want to feel? So both at a camp level, but also smaller circles. So lots of ways to create safety, both in terms of at the camp level, in terms of gender, but also the social and emotional. Because what we want to do is for 2 weeks really provide a sort of resilience bubble around these youth, so that this is an ideal scenario about how they should feel, so that they can go out into the greater world knowing that they're perfect just the way that they are, and tons of fun, like levels of fun that they've never had, so that each kid can say, this is what I want the world to be like, and this is who I want to be, so that they go out into the world feeling great.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that even though, you know, you have such a gender expansive staff, that you still do the training, because it's really important for everyone to have the same language, the same, you know, approach to kids, understand, you know, that it's not about them, it's about the kids, all of that. So I think that's really smart that you guys do that, despite kind of the gender literacy of your staff.
Right, right.
So Shana, have you received any pushback from other families or board members or any people like kind of related to the camp when implementing these measures?
You know, I haven't. So this is going to be I'm the education director, and this is going to be my 4th year running the camp. Our board has been super supportive. The executive director has been really supportive. I think that they're pleased that I'm finding resources such as Gender Spectrum to work with on this, and I think that they want our camp to be as inclusive as possible in all dimensions, so that it makes children and families feel safe and that they can enjoy their summer, you know. And camp is to me, camp is a place for kids to feel joy, and if you don't feel safe, you can't move into that space of joy. And so I've received nothing but support on that. And as for other parents, I've never had a parent comment to me anything about what is a child's gender. A couple of times kids have asked other kids, you know, are you a girl or a boy? And we follow up as appropriate, and that's planned. It's never reached a level that it became a big problem, I don't think.
How do you deal with bathrooms at camp, Shana?
It's a great question, because even if I've talked to a parent for 15 minutes or 20 minutes on the phone about how we plan to support their child, they will come back. And this happened to me the first time I did this, called a parent and talked to them for 20 minutes. At the very end of the conversation, she said, "But can she use the girls' room?" And I thought, wow, this is like a really profound question, because to me it was like, of course she can use the girls' room. That's kind of what I've been trying to say. But for the parent, it was like, no, I'm not just concerned about your philosophy. I'm concerned about the nuts and bolts of my child's experience. And so we welcome the children to use the restroom of the gender that they identify with. As far as we're concerned, they are that gender. And that's what we tell the parents. We also have an all genders bathroom at Fairyland, and there's actually a sign that's being made right now that has an icon that is it's kind of like the female male icons that has the dress or the pants. Mm-hmm. So it's one side dress and one side pants, mm-hmm. and it says all genders. So that's a one stall bathroom, and so the children can choose. They can choose to use a bathroom where they don't have to choose gender, or they can choose to use the bathroom of a gender that they identify with.
Great. And what about you, Sandra? Are all the restrooms at Rainbow Camp gender neutral, or how do you deal with it?
So the Rainbow Day Camp was run as a summer camp program through Prospect Sierra last summer, and they have gender expansive students, and so they have a gender expansive bathroom or a gender neutral bathroom at the camp. And what we did is we sort of took over all the bathrooms and made them all gender neutral bathrooms, and we sort of encourage all students or campers to just sort of make all the spaces gender neutral. But the school has been really wonderful and sort of running it as one of their summer camp programs while we try to work out our status. And I think that for us, we just, because of our philosophy in terms of allowing the students to determine the spaces, we're trying to take over the school and create as a campsite and do that as well. There are some bathroom stalls that have the urinal stalls, and so the kids were like, "What's that?" But in terms of like queering the spaces or whatever, or making them gender neutral, it becomes an educational moment as well. And okay. I think that so it was very possible. But they did have a all genders bathroom.
That's great. And what would you both say that you've learned, like through this process of, Sandra creating this camp and Shana, making your camp consciously more gender inclusive? What have you learned about gender yourselves in this process, if anything?
Well, I think for me individually, I realize that as a society that we're still trying to figure out what kind of agency we're giving children, right? And in terms of that, that they don't grow up at 18. We have to teach them along the way, And so I think that that's interesting as a society about how do we teach children? We are raising adults, and there's this great book out that was done by a Stanford admissions officer about how to raise an adult, and I kept thinking about that. We don't just turn them over at 18. We have to teach them along the way, and so empowering youth to determine their gender identity and allowing them to express themselves about gender is part of this process, right? How long and at what age do we allow them to individually express themselves, to have personal liberation as part of this. And I know in the Bay Area we are so blessed to be part of this gender revolution, because in terms of the Bay Area, we are infused by this ability to listen to our children, to follow their lead, and gender is part of that. And so that's one issue. But I think overall that it's beautiful to watch kids play joyfully at a summer camp, and the more that we get out of the gender binary and allow kids to express themselves, to be who they are authentically outside of this gender binary, it benefits everybody, not just gender expansive kids, but cisgender kids, right? Because these are colors, these are everything, toys, items that are meant to benefit all of humanity. And so the more we box kids in and tell them who they are supposed to be, the more miserable they become. So this kind of, gender liberation is really about human liberation, right? And so, I don't know, it makes me think about there's it's a tightrope of not just gender, but overall human liberation. And as a society, our kids are suffering not just because of gender, but because we're not raising adults, right? We're not allowing them to really be personally free. So I think this camp experience has been really about allowing kids to realize their full potential as humans. So it's a dimension of it.
Yeah. What about you, Shana? What have you learned about gender kind of in this whole process?
I see. Well, when I originally went to the training with Joel, that was the first time I was exposed to the sort of gingerbread person image and the 3 dimensions of gender. And one thing that has been really profound to me is the clarification of the fact that gender identity is completely unrelated to sexual orientation, which is something that I understood in a vague sense, but had never had really laid down to me. And so when we talk about a child identifying as a girl, that has nothing to do with who they're attracted to. We're talking about a 5-year-old, you know? And so there are people who have, when I've talked to some people about gender expansiveness, sometimes you hear people say things like, wow, it's amazing that the child identifies as a boy when the child is biologically female at only 5 years of age. How can they do that early? And to me, that's such a nonsensical question because I knew I was a girl when I was 2 or 3. But I think people are still equating gender expansiveness with being gay or lesbian or bisexual, which is it's not. Right. And so I think that's something, that clarification has been very helpful for me.
That's a good point. Now, what are some ways that campers and staff can be, do you think, who are cisgendered, do you think can be good allies for your gender expansive campers? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I think for we call them teachers, our counselors. I think for our teachers, it's about that preparation is huge. Being prepared so that we are setting our children up for success, figuring out what their comfort level is beforehand, and a lot of that has to do with a conversation with me and me sharing what the parents have said, but also the teachers just being conscientious the whole week about any topics that may come up among other kids asking that child questions, kids talking amongst each other. And one of the things is it's really easy to go, well, if a kid says to another kid, are you a girl or a boy? I think it's very easy to think, well, that was, that's such a rude question. That's hurtful or disrespectful. But for a 5-year-old child, they're just curious and they don't understand. So I think we need to approach children who are experiencing confusion about someone else's gender with compassion as well. Now, that does not give anyone a license to bully or tease, but it means that everyone is having a learning experience. And a lot of times that might mean expressing he's a boy, and then pulling that child away and having a compassionate conversation with them about how if somebody says they're a boy, and maybe you don't think they are, but that's pretty much the way it is. Yeah. And that it really comes down to showing our respect by treating people the way we would want to be treated. It all comes down to the golden rule. I also think that that cisgender kids have a huge benefit from being around gender expansive children, but maybe that's another question.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, that is one of the questions as well, like, that we can fold into this, like, what benefits do you see to your cisgender campers?
Huge. I mean, first of all, we're working on building a more inclusive society, right? And so gender identity is an aspect of that inclusive society. And of course, when we're doing staff training, we're also talking about many dimensions of diversity, race, class, gender, and I talk about family makeup too. And any of those other dimensions of diversity can intersect with gender identity, making things, even more complex. So I would say gender roles impact everyone. gender expectations impact everyone, gender expansive children and cisgendered children. And I think that being around gender expansive children helps cisgendered children to see gender in a more complex way, to understand that it's not simply binary girl and boy, to understand that there's not girl things and boy things, and to become more comfortable with ambiguity in their lives. I think that we move toward a more inclusive and respectful society when we become a little bit more comfortable with ambiguity and the fact that we're not going to understand every detail of someone, that we can still treat them with respect and we can still be friends with someone, and that gender is more of a big and fluid concept than they might understand.
Yeah, that's good for everyone for sure. What about you, Sandra? Because you have allies and siblings at camp, what do you think?
Right. I mean,
Are ways to be a good ally?
Yeah, so the interesting thing at my camp is that you may not know who's cisgendered, who's gender expansive, and who's transgendered, and we have really extroverted campers as well as introverted campers. And so what we try to do is really allow each camper to find their voice, and we create a really pro-social environment, a lot of caring relationships, and we try to really manage, stereotype threat, and so we're doing all this stuff in terms of identity safety, social emotional resilience, as well as gender inclusivity, so that each person is really met where they are, both in terms of their gender identity, gender expression, and their social emotional intelligence. And so what we're trying to do is really create a gender inclusive space and have campers and counselor relationships that are strong. And so it's about being a good ally is really about being a really playful, caring relationship between the camper and the counselor. And so I think it means interrupting bias wherever you see it along so many dimensions, and that could be around gender, expression, identity, but it also can mean in terms of bullying, right? So it means being a really good friend, a kind, caring person. And so if somebody's, trying to be disrespectful, that's what it really comes down to, I think, for the camp, is just about meeting everybody where they are, I think bad behavior, there's a symptom of something else, right? So comments can be, it's not just about, behavior, and comments and statements and play are so important because it's about taking the time to really understand what it all means and understanding the context. That's what we do a lot of work about with our counselors, is like, somebody may do something or say something, but you don't punish that. You try to say, what's going on? And you pull somebody aside, or you pull the pair aside to figure out what is going on, because often they may be curious about each other, and they may trigger one another, because that's how kids play, right, is through quote-unquote bad behavior, because that's about, these are all teachable moments, right?
Right, you teach it as a learning,
right,
as a learning opportunity, yeah.
Exactly. And so it's really important to sort of really, that's the pro-social behavior, and these are the teachable moments that are really the only way to really get to know one another as human beings, is to really talk to one another, not to be fearful of one another.
I want to ask one more question, and then we have a few questions I want to make sure we get to, but have either of you come across any particular issues related to campers who identify as non-binary in an in-between space, or agender or genderqueer, that have come up in your camp and camp planning that you've had to deal with in any different way?
Yeah, I've had sort of agender campers, really young campers, so we just try to create spaces for them where they don't have to declare whether they're male, female, or boy or girl, and these are really young, 5 or 6 year olds, and as well as teens. And I think that other campers try to interrogate and put them in a box, even when they're sophisticated, transgender, gender expansive youth. And so, we think about, if you're gender binary, you still try to keep putting people in boxes, but even gender expansive youth or transgender youth try to keep putting each other in a box. So I think that
that's what we're taught to do, right?
Right, exactly. And so even when you are other, you try to other one another. So I think that it's just how to create these spaces just to allow people to be. And I think that there are so many great picture books out now, like Meet Polka Dot, that are allowing for these, storybooks to sort of create in concrete ways of demonstrating for young children that there are more ways of being just a boy or a girl that are great. But it is, we have complex, my registration for the camp is 6 pages long to sort of allow parents as much detail as they want to or not. You can opt in or opt out in terms of...
Right, that's the same as Shauna's point of like preparation is key, right? It's all about getting in front of the topic, knowing your campers, and knowing how they want to be, what pronouns, what names, how they want to deal with situations with questions, and privacy and all of that. So
because there's nothing as tender as dropping off your kid, right? That you want to be able to drop your child off and know that they're going to be held for a week or two and really thrive.
Exactly. So we have a couple of questions. One is from Laura, who says, do you have any suggestions, thoughts, or materials for training staff and helping them understand how this work affects all kids, particularly for staff who may be hesitant because of their cultural or religious backgrounds? So one thing I wanted to highlight is that Gender Spectrum, we've created a few new resources which are on our website that I think are really helpful for camps and also for parents. One is called there's a framework for gender inclusive camps. You can find it on the parent resource page, parenting and family resource page, and there'll be a link, I believe, in the showcase on the video. One is called a framework for gender inclusive camps that just kind of says, what does it mean, what a gender inclusive camp does, X, Y, and Z. This is what it looks like. These are different entry points of how to start this work at a camp. Another one is an FAQ for summer camps and activities, which I think is really helpful more for parents who are thinking about camps, so I would definitely look at that. And then we've created 2 forms. One is called a gender support plan. It's called a gender support plan that you can take to your camp and work through it with your camp leaders about kind of planning ahead of time. So the stuff that you two do naturally, the planning ahead, this form helps a parent kind of sit with the camp leader and go through it and think about the issues ahead of time of what might come up and how you want to deal with it and how what'll feel safe for your kid. And then the 4th new resource we have is called the Plan for a Gender Change at Camp. So if your kid is returning to a camp that they've been to before and will be known kind of as either a different expression or a different pronoun, some kind of gender change, this form kind of you can use to sit with your camp leaders and help figure out how to share that information in a safe way. Just make a plan around that kind of transition for the camp if the camper is returning. So those are 4 resources that are there. And do you, Sandra or Shana, have other things you would want to share?
Yeah, I would speak to. Well, first of all, I think it's important to do a substantial training on diversity in general, covering a lot of aspects of diversity for your staff, and take at least an hour and a half or 2 hours to do that. And as I said, mine covers race, class, gender, and family makeup. So we look at gender expansiveness as an aspect of the gender category. And so if I'm talking to staff members about how we make camp an environment that that is not encouraging cultural stereotypes about gender, that's a good jumping off board to talk about gender expansiveness. Because then we're saying we want children to feel that they can simply be themselves, that they can enjoy who they are, and that they can be respected in this environment. And if a child is cisgendered, if a child is gender expansive, they all get that benefit. I think that one thing that's really important to talk to staff members about is praise. And praise is so often gendered in our culture. And I think a part of that has to do with the limitations of our language, the fact that we that there's, people use they or they use ze, but we still don't have a widely accepted term for not being simply binary male or female. But I want to point out that so many of our praises for children are gendered, from the very basic good girl, good boy, going further to telling a girl, you're so cute, you're so sweet, look at your pretty hair, you must be so popular. These things that are really about reinforcing gender stereotypes of what's important to being a girl. Or you're, look at you, you know, you see a girl in the grocery store, look at you, your mommy's little helper, that kind of stuff. Whereas with boys, we're looking at them and going, look at you, you're so strong, you're so tough, you're so brave. All children need to be encouraged to be sweet and loving and strong and brave and courageous. All children should get the benefit of specific praise about the choices they are making. And I think we need to think critically about the kind of praise we're giving, because we always give praise with the intention of doing a positive thing. But if we give praise without thinking about the impact it can have, it can reinforce that binary, and it can also make people feel like they're being put in a box and kind of shut in. And so I make a point of saying to little girls, look at you carrying that. Look how strong you are. You're using all your muscles. And I make a point of saying to little boys, that is so kind of you to sit with a younger child, and it really shows that you are really using a good heart. So I want to shake it up and treat children as children and praise them for the positive choices they make.
I think that's really smart, because I think a lot of those things that come out of our mouths unconsciously, right, that we don't even think of them as gendered, they just come out of our mouth. So like bringing that up with your staff and saying, listen, we need to be conscious about our praise and what we're saying, I think is really a smart tactic up front.
And if I could say one more thing, my biggest pet peeve in all of my years of school and in any camp I've worked in is people saying, good morning, boys and girls. Boys and girls, please sit down. Boys and girls this, boys and girls that, or ladies and gentlemen. We don't greet children for the day and say, good morning, tall and short children. We don't say good morning, black, white, Latino, and Asian children. We don't tell them constantly that their differences are critically important, even in the greeting process. It's just not necessary, and it's not helpful.
Right. So what do you do instead? You say good morning, campers, good morning,
students. I say good morning, campers, good morning, kids, good morning, time travelers, good morning, friends. We call them friends a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you do that as well, Sandra?
Right. I mean, there are other ways of dividing up groups other than, biology. And I think that, our camp director, AK, is amazing at doing so. It'll be like, who is wearing purple? Or, who is feeling wacko? Or who is feeling really quiet today? I mean, so there's a way of being able to read the energy of the group other than resorting to biology. And I think we've been really blessed about having Gender Spectrum do our training. In terms of, for the question that was, Laura asked, I think that, the best way of developing empathy and an awareness of your staff is to read. I mean, there's so many great biographies out there by Janet Mock. Jazz Jennings had her whole lifetime on TV, so that you can go, there are children's books too, so if you want to go through and either present it to your camping staff or campers, you can do children's books now. So I think that by, reading and sort of taking in sort of the perspective of gender expansive youth or gender expansive adults, you can get a sense of what it means to have had this experience from a young age or an older age, having transitioned or not transitioned, being agender. I mean, there's a lot more being published now. I mean, there's still a lot more to be done. But we had Alex Gino, who wrote the book George, that's come to our play group. We had 70 people there, and it was amazing that Alex became this role model. So I think that there's a lot more
to be done with storytelling. Yeah, and also I wanted to. Oh, sorry, the train is going by. Gender Spectrum, we have an annotated bibliography of 2 of them. There's one for children's books and one's for books for teens. That's on our website. So if people who run camps or counselors are looking for good books, that's a good place to start, just to see how you feel about those books. Have a story time. I think that's a resource that's there for you as well. And also, as far as training, sorry, go ahead.
Can I throw one other thing, Pam? I want to tell Laura, I think it's a great question. And the way I start my diversity training is by sitting down with the teachers and saying, I want everyone to take 10 minutes to silently write ways that you felt different when you were a child. And this helps them explore all the dimensions of diversity in terms of how they impact children's self-image and the way children are treated by others. So it could be anything from, I had braces, I went to Chinese school, I was chubby, you know, anything. And then when we talk about race, class, gender, and family makeup, they're able to make the connection between their own experiences, even if those were not particular challenges for them.
I think that's smart, right? And to always for adults who are working with kids, to relate it back to themselves, I think is always a really good starting point as well, because everybody has a gender, everybody has a gender story, everybody's been affected by gender roles and stereotypes and expectations, and to personalize it, I think is very helpful in creating empathy for the kids as well. All right, let's move on. There's one other question that came in from Noemi, which is, what concerns or questions do you get from parents regarding gender-neutral bathrooms, and how do you address those questions? Sandra, I assume you don't get many questions, but Shana, do you have you had any questions about?
I really haven't. And this is really always the biggest concern of the parents of gender-expansive children in terms of what I've experienced so far is the bathroom thing. We're just very straightforward about it.
Right, and you have all three options, so a child can choose whatever they're comfortable with.
Right,
but you know, often.
What was that?
Right, exactly. And the child might change from day to day as far as what bathroom they would choose to use. But one good thing to talk about, Noemi, is I think just emphasizing privacy and respect for all children. I mean, no child should be looking at any other child's body or invading their privacy in a bathroom situation, no matter what. So it really should be kind of no different, as long as there are stalls in the bathroom, that, you know, people are, you know, what's in one child's pants versus the other. So I think that's one way to talk about it, just that you're, you know, it's a private space, you're not trying, you know, there's really nothing different than your bathroom at home, right? You go at home, that we don't have, you know, separate bathrooms for girls and boys in our homes, but really emphasize, and then if there's any issues, I think that's also the way to deal with it as well, that you deal with, you know, talking to all the kids about privacy in bathrooms and respect and how you behave in any public bathroom space. So that is what I would say there. So let me see. One other question I had that I wanted to make sure we touched on is let me see what it was. What advice would you guys have for parents or caregivers with gender expansive kids that are looking for a local camp? Oh, and I see a question came in from Bradley. What would we say to parents and kids about if they're looking for a safe camp for their kids? What advice would we have for them?
Well, not everyone has the benefit of having gender spectrum right nearby them.
Well, though I have to say, we do a lot. We do work nationally, and we do work online, and we do a lot of training. So I wanted to actually mention that. Thank you, Shana. Like, we do coaching and consultations and trainings. So that's something that we might be able to be a resource for as well for camps. So go ahead,
That's
Shana.
Awesome. So, you know, the training that I went to helped me in terms of developing my language and developing how I was going to represent gender on the forums. But I already had a social justice orientation, and I already had an attitude of welcoming and celebrating as opposed to tolerating. And I think that's what you're looking for in a camp. If a parent, you might not see a forum where someone says, you know, where someone has created language that is geared toward gender expansive youth. But that, I don't think, I hope that doesn't deter parents from camps, because they might have not been to a training. So, you know, I encourage parents to look at the website, see if the camp has any statements about social emotional development, diversity, or inclusion. And then either way, to call the director should make themselves available to you, and the director, if you don't, I think what you want to feel when you're coming away from the director is that even if they haven't experienced working with a gender expansive child before, that they are super excited to work with your child, that they have answers for your questions, and that they're motivated to make it work. If they sound like they're going to do it begrudgingly, that's not a camp you want to go to, obviously. But I don't think that they necessarily have to have had the experience of working with gender expansive children before. They have to have a social justice orientation, and they have to be ready to be proactive about supporting that child socially and emotionally at camp.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that, Sandra? I think that's a really good point.
I think, yeah, I mean, don't be shy. And as a parent or guardian, just do your homework. I mean, call the director. Understand what kind of mechanisms they would be able to have to check in with your camper. And that could mean, and it depends on your camper. They could be really shy, they could be really outgoing, they could be very out, and they could have socially transitioned, or they could be going stealth. So it really depends on where your camper is, and it depends on what your camper wants, right? So you have to check in with your kid, you have to check in with the camp, and it has to be dynamic, right? And so if the director is willing to work with you, that's great. And it's all about communication, and it's all about being able to find some kind of flexibility and negotiation. And so I think that it's about human relationships and about being able to find a kind director, and education. So I think that in the end, it's about being able to feel that you have a comfort level about being able to drop your kid off. And if you can find that, that's wonderful, because it's about feeling like you can drop your kid off and they'll be held. And I think that no matter, I would love for Gender Spectrum to be able to go over every single camp and do the training, but that's not feasible. So I think in the end, if your camper can find some place where they'll be able to play and have joy and have a flexible situation, that's wonderful. And I've had friends who've gone to camps and they've been able to work out an agreement, and Gender Spectrum wasn't there, but it worked for them. That's wonderful. But I've had, friends who went to name brand camps where they were totally alienated. So I think you just want to be able to find something that can work for,
Right.
So that your kid
and then if you do find that director who's open to learning, then use our gender support plan or to bring with you and request a meeting and start the preparation. I mean, they might need a little help. They might not even know what to think of, but we have all the different issues listed there. Not all of them may apply to your camp and your kid, but we have the tools to help you start having those conversations.
Right.
So definitely use those as well. Okay, we are getting close on time, but we have one more question. And this is from Laura. What suggestions do you have for overnight camps where campers are separated by gender for cabins? To assure that you're still affirming non-binary gender identities. Now, neither of you guys have overnight camps. I don't know if you have, or otherwise, if you have suggestions, or I can chime in too.
I would love if you said that. I would love to hear your answer to that. I have been directed an overnight camp.
Yeah, I have a friend who is on a board of a national organization who has girls' overnight camps, and they did an amazing process. I mean, they did get lawyers involved, but they basically allowed the transgender girl to choose and self-determine. The question was whether they had to notify the other girls, but in the end, and their parents, and they didn't. But what I thought was really refreshing about this position was that it was affirming, right? They affirmed the self-determined transgender girl to choose and her identity, and so this is a national camp, and I thought how beautiful that we're going to this place of being able to affirm a girl's position of who she is, and the family was pleased, the organization was pleased, and she had an amazing sleepaway camp experience, and all the other girls had an amazing sleepaway camp experience, and this is kind of like the new frontier of what it means to be a girl. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think
not to cry.
I think
right. I mean,
I think too that. Sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to.
No. But I mean, the issue aside of privacy is that who really, I mean, she just wanted to be accepted as a girl, and the organization just wanted to make sure that they respected her privacy. But what they were afraid of was if the other parents found out, would it be like, oh, but she's an anatomical boy, but her, and so they were trying to weigh that issue. But in the end, it was about her
wanting to be. And so that's what I specifically asking about non-binary gender identities in camps, which is definitely more tricky. But I think the starting place is you start with what does the camper want?
Right.
Where does the camper, do they want to be in, if there's gendered cabins, do they want to be in one or the other? And then I've seen some camps create a third cabin, that is a gender mixed cabin, gender, all genders cabin. And then you set it up for success in the sense that you ask them, are there a couple of kids who are already friends with your kid who might who would choose to be in that cabin with them? So that's one option. Some kids choose, and again, it always goes back to kind of what the child wants to feel comfortable. Some kids choose to be, sometimes there's options to be in a cabin with a counselor or counselors. Some kid, but I've seen camps that before have had separate gender cabins create a third one. I mean, ideally, I think, for a non-binary kid, all cabins would be mixed gender, and it wouldn't have to do with gender. It would have to do with, just putting kids together in some other way, and making sure that there's privacy for changing clothes and restrooms and all of that. But not every camp is willing to do that. So the third option, or just really working with the kid in the camp and coming up with kind of creative solutions ahead of time to see if there's any way that they can accommodate it. We've seen that be successful. So just I think on final thoughts, I just wanted to hear from you guys some closing thoughts on, why do you think camp is important, and important specifically for gender expansive kids? Sandra, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think for me, I was, the history of my camp was that it was born out of sadness and love, because I happened to be a parent of a gender expansive kid, that I really wanted to provide a space in which gender expansive youth along the spectrum were just celebrated and loved, that the messaging that they got was that they were perfect just the way they are wherever they were along the spectrum, because that was not necessarily their social experience, that I wanted to have an amazing experience for them, and that they got to have just a really joyful 2 weeks where they got just to have a lot of modeling through amazing counselors, amazing specialists, and so that they had this crazy, not crazy, but just like outstanding experience, so that they could take it to the rest of the summer where it was joyful, playful, that they got to meet other gender expansive kids, they had adults in their lives that were also gender expansive, and that their parents and their guardians got to also have support as well, so that they could feel relaxed, that they knew that they could find some networks of support too, because they needed to feel celebrated and not so isolated in their communities or in their schools, because and so to have just just have fun in the summer, right? Just even if it was 1 week or 2 weeks.
What about you, Shana? Do you have any final thoughts on camp?
Well, yeah, I mean, camp played a critical role in who I am as a person today, going to summer camp. I went to Hidden Villa in Los Altos Hills, which was the first multicultural camp west of the Mississippi. And it had a massive impact in creating a social justice orientation for me. Camp is a place for children to be filled with joy, excitement, and to kind of live on their own terms and on a child's agenda, instead of dealing with standards and testing. And teachers are under so much pressure to, get the standards taught and get the testing up, that a lot of times they don't get to do the social and emotional education that they know how to do and that they're good at and that they feel is valuable. Camp is a space where there are not standards and requirements for things that teachers need to teach. Our camp rules are only two: be safe and be respectful. And as long as the kids are doing those two things, they're good to go and just have fun. And so I just think that camp should be a place where you can explore who you are, how you want to relate to people. And in saying one last thing about gender at camp, it's a wonderful environment for children to think about and play with gender who are both cisgendered and transgendered or gender expansive. And one example of that I wanted to share is one of my camp teachers last summer, Leo, got a My Little Pony Friendship is Magic watch. And he wore it every day, and it started fantastic conversations with children about gender, who said, "Why are you wearing that? You're a boy." And that opened an organic door to talk about gender in a way that was completely age appropriate. And it meant that children, whether they were cisgendered or gender expansive or transgendered, knew that at our camp they didn't have to be bound in what they liked or who they were by their gender. That this is one dimension of being a whole person, you know, that you are a complete person. It has to do with many, many, many aspects of you, and you don't have to be bound to any kind of expectations of gender.
Yeah, I love that one simple thing of wearing a watch, you know, one little gender expression that, you know, is a little bit outside of the box can really make a big difference for, you know, for all the kids at camp. All right, well, we are out of time. We could keep talking, I know. If people want to have more questions, there's a forum on the Gender Spectrum Lounge specifically to follow up with this conversation. Please, you know, continue the conversation there. And I really want to thank Shana and Sandra for participating today, and thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Gender Spectrum.
Pam, I wanted to say that people are welcome to contact me if they have any questions about making a general day camp more gender inclusive at education@fairyland.org.
Okay, wonderful. And we're putting a link to Fairyland and to Rainbow Day Camp on, you know, that'll be connected with this YouTube. So
thank you, Gender Spectrum.
Bye. Thank you.